Hello, my name is Tammy Davis, and I appreciate you very much. So, today I want to talk a bit about the DNA and stress, mental health overall, but kind of talking a little bit about schizophrenia and autism and negative attention seeking, addiction. You see, it came to, yeah, there's a lot of conversations going on right now. I mean, given the fact with this pandemic and the number of people, well, a lot of us who've been in isolation and the distress that it's been financially, emotionally, just not being able to work. I mean, just a complete disruption to life. So there's a lot of talk around that. At the same time, I was asked a question yesterday by um, an Amish woman who is a mentor with her particular community. She's helping a number of people, but one of the questions that she asked me was in reference to a actual client of mine, somebody that she referred to me, a 16-year-old boy who I don't think they've given him a formal diagnosis, although I mean it clearly sounds like it would come out as schizophrenia. A lot of psychotic episodes, and right now they're currently working with medications. Um, which I don't want to talk about medications in this. That's not what this is about. But her question to me was, well, certainly there has to be food for the brain, to help, because this is kind of their mindset. It's like, well, how do we fix this problem? Which we all are like that, right? And so, but they're looking for, they're looking at what resources that they have. And I had to explain to her that, my concern with this young man is basically he's reacting badly to the combination of medications. But it just brought a lot of things to mind. Because somebody was saying to me this morning, well, with schizophrenia, they don't trust, there's, with the voices in their head. And it just got me to thinking, because I've talked an awful lot. I've studied and worked with addiction. I've worked with both schizophrenia and autism. I've managed my own negative attention-seeking children. And so it just really kind of got me to just wrestling with this a little bit, and it's what brought me here today. Now, historically, I've talked about caffeine. Okay, we've talked about addiction, and there's a number of substances that have been linked to the change within the dopaminergic mesolimbic pathway. Now, that's the pathway. It's where there's the dopamine receptors. That's actually the pathway that's linked to addiction. So, recognizing the fact that things like cocaine and alcohol and other, like I said, other substances will alter the structure of this brain, meaning it just changes the way it processes information. Okay, this is the brain. The brain is a live organ. It is a structure that has the ability to adapt. And one of the things that we've been able to firmly say that isn't, it's not an absolute, but we've been able to confirm that neuroplasticity is a part of our existence. It doesn't stop in your early 20s. That if we really develop methods for paying attention to our brain and rework, and doing things differently. I've talked about this too, about breaking free of the habitual behaviors and beginning to be aware of what it is you're doing and changing maybe something that you do, and because that repatterning of the way we do our basic life choice, daily choices in life, actually consistently exercises the brain. And so there's neural pathways that are new ones that are laid out, and so they've been able to confirm that there have been 80-year-olds that have very young brains, so to speak. So with that in mind, I say that because that, like I said, the dopaminergic mesolimbic pathway is one of those parts of the brain that will be altered depending on what it's introduced to. So, like I said, alcohol, cocaine, caffeine is another substance. And so, again, in previous videos and blog posts, I've suggested that with 90% of the world population consuming caffeine on a regular basis, it is listed in the DSM-5 as an addictive substance. So caffeine changes the brain structure as well, or adjusts the way that pathway fires. It's fair to say that 90% of the world is living with addiction. Now, you might be wondering, well, why am I saying that if this is your first time hearing that? Well, again, the change to that structure is the confirmed way to diagnose addiction. We can talk about, this is the reason why there's been a little bit changing to the language right now. We'll oftentimes refer to something as a substance abuse, behaviors, someone who's demonstrating substance abuse behaviors. But in order to confirm addiction by the true sense of the word, it has to be a change to that brain structure. So that said, if caffeine is one of those substances, then it's fair to say that most of us that consume caffeine, even if you've consumed it historically, you have had changes to that and can be confirmed living with the diagnosis of addiction. I say that very lightly, because I don't see addiction as a problem. I see, well, I mean, before anybody comes back at me, it is a problem socially, it is a problem physically, it is a problem mentally, emotionally. But as far as the word addiction is concerned, and although we classify it as a disease, I wanted to say that ultimately what it comes down to, it is the body's response to the information coming in, and we'll get to that here shortly. So please understand, having lived around addiction, having worked with addiction, having dealt with my own levels of addictive behaviors, I completely recognize the importance of and the complications that can arise from that particular disorder. So when I say, so please erase that last thought or that last little blurt where I said it wasn't a problem. I hope I corrected myself there. So anyway, so as I mentioned, so there's a number of substances that have been confirmed to be able to have this effect on the brain. That said, so does cortisol. Cortisol has the same effect on the brain. So it leaves me to believe that essentially how this pathway plays out, depending on the individual epigenome, the individual wiring, if you will, how this plays out it was determined by just that, an individual's wiring. It could turn into substance abuse behavior, addictive type behaviors and engagement. It could turn into schizophrenia. It could be a child that looks like they were, like as if they were born with autism. They end up with a diagnosis of autism. I'm stumbling with my words, so please understand that I'm not trying to disqualify and downplay anything. Because when we're living with these things, whether we are the individual living with it or we are someone in the family that's around it, it is very intense and it is very concerning, and it is also, it's a hardship because we're all trying to figure out how to, I guess you want to say fix it. Like my Amish woman Annie asked me, how do we fix this with food? So, but I want to, again, but the whole purpose of this is to talk about the DNA and its relation to these different mental health concerns that we have across the board. Everything that I share here, there's a specific link it's in the description box to kind of begin backing up what I'm saying. This isn't just based on speculation and, hey, I just feel like throwing another wrench in the in the wheel here. This is based on, like I said, having lived with my own, having been surrounded by it, including my immediate family, having worked with working in treatment facilities with various mood disorders, eating disorders, having supported and served families with schizophrenia and autism. I feel like I'm very well versed in this. And more importantly, I have spent an awful lot of time contemplating what the heck is really going on here. So number one, to offer some sort of insight and a different way of coming at this, as opposed to just trying to regulate the chemistry with some of these medications. I've started a group called Balanced Wellness. It is a private Facebook group. It's a membership group that, although there's materials and videos, it's a lot of personal one-on-one, or in a group setting, a lot of consulting and coaching around this kind of things, talking about medications and how to integrate natural remedies for a lot of good reasons, especially when it comes to medications, but learning how to do it safely. With the talk of the coronavirus, right now, I think the United States is nearing, I know we're nearing like almost 60,000 deaths from it. The numbers continue to grow. But just in all fairness, and I know people are comparing this to the flu, but my biggest concern, truthfully, is the number of drug injuries. This is not deliberate overdoses. This is actual drug injuries that are occurring because people, either a medication doesn't work with an individual system, or they're being combined with other things that interact poorly, which includes natural remedies. And so, as of over the last decade, no, pardon me, over the last 20 years, we've lost over 10 million people to drug injuries. Again, that's not self-inflicted overdoses. This is just, people dying from taking some form of psychotropic medication. That's part of the reason why I want to do that. I'm doing this video. Secondly, we currently have, between 2005 and 2010, it was reported that approximately 6% of the U.S. population of children was taking some form of psychotropic. As of 2018, that had increased to 20% of the children in our country. And in 2012, there was a great report, or a peer-reviewed research document that indicates the number of antipsychotics, or the types of antipsychotics that were being administered for autism. So this is a growing concern, and another reason why I'm offering this. So everything that I share here is backed by science. It's not just pure speculation. It's based on my experience, and of course, like I said, my questions as to what's really going on, and is there another way to support the body, instead of having a person just be traumatized by the voices and the negative, and the abusive behavior and so forth. So again, with this young man, one of the symptoms that has just, and I don't even call it, it's not a symptom of, well, it is. Schizophrenia is, oftentimes we look at schizophrenia as somebody who's a danger to society, and that's very infrequent, if at all. There may be some engagement at that level, but truthfully, people living with schizophrenia are not a danger to society. They're more of a danger to themselves, as evidenced in this young man who really started showing some self-harm behavior. Everybody wants to know why. And unfortunately, when we have a conventional model that is just attempting to control and quiet and stop this, trying to figure out how to stop it, my whole thing is there's got to be something else going on. So, as I said, not just having lived it, but taken university level courses in it and really studied, and even in pharmacology, my background includes pharmacology, and having studied the proponents of addiction, and even in psychology, I've done 4 years of, I think I had like 4 years every semester, at least 2 classes in psychology for 4 years. So it was a pretty extensive psychology program that I decided to take on by myself. But the reason is because I'm fascinated by the brain, and I'm fascinated by this neurochemistry and really what's all going on. And then, of course, with the oils, If you're new to me, I have been working with essential oils now for over 30 years, and as I said, I have a background in pharmacology, so the two work well together. But understanding how these things are really affecting the body is significantly important to me. I have no idea why. I wish some days I could turn it off. Um, but I just want to pose a question to you if you've gotten this far, and that is, you may be somebody that has, you may be living with something like schizophrenia or autism or addiction, um, some kind of diagnosis with mental health concerns. You may be that person. You may be a family member. You may be just watching this because it piqued your interest. Thank you. Thank you to all of you. But let me just straight up ask you, how many times have you had a negative thought, you know, about anything? How many times have you just kind of like been doing something and just, your mind started wandering, and, you had some kind of like gruesome thought to do that? Why don't you just go do this? Why don't you I wonder what it'd be like if I just drove my car off the road right now? I don't know. Maybe not. But if you just be honest with yourself, now imagine not being able to turn that off. Like, you know, that we don't, I mean, to me, the break with, in the case of a psychotic event, is that we don't have the ability, they lose that ability to cross that. I mean, it's a nanosecond, and they just lose that ability. They just, all of a sudden, it can't happen now. Um, but the rest of us have the capacity to say, wait a minute, I don't want to think like this. What am I doing this for? This is no, 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 no. But it's that fine line. And so what's causing that fine line? What is causing somebody to have that one moment of break? Because the truth is like a psychotic event may not be preceded by anything that looks stressful to you and me. It may just be something like a breakup. It could very well be something like a bad grade in school. It could be anything. It doesn't have to be significant. And that's one of the things when I talk to parents of young people living with schizophrenia, they go, well, I don't know why it happened. I didn't realize anything was going on. So if you remember what I said earlier in this video, cortisol also has the ability, or is linked to, rather, cortisol is linked to changes within this dopaminergic mesolimbic pathway. And in fact, there's a study that was done in 2011 that suggests that even addiction is not about the reward, it's about the pursuit of the reward. So this really speaks highly to stress, okay? This speaks highly to whether we're talking about autism or negative attention seeking or schizophrenia or depression or anxiety. I mean, there's this pursuit of something, and it causes changes and so it affects the way the neurochemistry flows. But here again, to classify this as a disease and something that people can't recover from, well, that may be the case given our current environment. This is why it's time to pose different, practices. Consider including oils, authentic oils, with our medications, not in lieu of, but in addition to. Because here's the deal. I say it again. Cortisol is linked to changes in that dopaminergic mesolimbic pathway. So at that rate, each one of us, as I said earlier before I went off on my little tangent there, each one of us is technically born with can be born with the diagnosis of addiction because the brain has changed, which subsequently alters the way the neurochemistry, influences brain activity as well as physical activity. And depending on your genetic wiring, it is going to alter or it's going to affect what ultimately you manifest in the way of health issues. In the immediate, like right after you're born or in early childhood, or maybe not until later. And again, that's also influenced by your lifestyle choices, your mental and emotional state, how well you can manage your thoughts. So with that in mind, this explains why our children are being diagnosed with autism right when they're born. Now, I haven't really said much as to what's going on, so I'm going to get into this a little bit further with you. So, again, with the coronavirus, and I'm finishing up a post right now called "The Life and Times of a Virus," and I've just been exploring these different theories of mine, is how I will say that, and at any rate, the DNA is not some sort of like prima donna trapped in a bubble that cannot be exposed. No, it's not like some kind of foreign object that just exists in a cell that doesn't have any, just because it's, in a cell, it is still exposed to the environment. Now, I've talked extensively about this, and so but I really want to highlight it here. In the 30s and 40s of the 20th century, the 1930s and 40s, it was determined that DNA have segments that they named transponal elements. Okay. Today, we often talk about DNA damage. Okay. We also recognize the fact that viruses have the ability to alter genetic expression of its host cell. We realize that light has the ability to affect genetic expression of a cell. Light will not differentiate between a human cell and a virus cell and a plant cell. But see, it's not damaging. Our terminology is that it's damaging. It's altering the expression and damaging it. It's not damaging it. The DNA has the ability, and it does on a regular basis. It has a little CPU unit that the MAPK pathway, which actually is notifying the DNA of what's going on, and the DNA at that point begins to send signals for the production of oxidative stress. It cannot differentiate between if it's going to be a physical damage or if it's just, if it's an invading microbe or if it's just light. It doesn't. It just begins to produce oxidative stress for the protection and the healing of the tissues and maintain the organism's survivability. Okay, that's what happens. So it's not being damaged. It is changing on its own in accordance to what the messages are coming in, thereby, again, signaling the production of oxidative stress, which is inflammation. One of the forms of activity that takes place is the release of mast cells. Okay, mast cells contain histamine. And so as these mast cells are circulating through the body, they begin to release histamine. Okay, so now we have influence. It could be 5G. Okay, 5G is light. Okay, it could be a virus. It could be an endocrine disruptor, a man-made chemical that just kind of went wafting past you, and now the DNA is like, whoa, changes. Morning, Will Robinson, and change. Okay, so these chemicals, these influences affect the DNA. So now the DNA signals we need inflammatory processes activated, and all these things happen. So that's your stress right there. Okay, now if you have mental and emotional distress, now you've just compounded everything. But the fact is it doesn't differentiate. It does not have the ability to know whether it's a true threat or if it's one that we're making up because we're worried. Okay, when it comes to things like autism and schizophrenia, and we start to dip into those mood disorders and addictive type behaviors, it becomes more difficult to control. Okay, so it's very hard, like I said, to begin to stop that. It's just it's hard to get a grip on that, because those voices, as I tell my parents, not my parents, but the parents of my clients, it's very difficult because their voices in their mind are louder than ours. And the same can be said for a lot of us when people are talking to us and we want to be right about something, but that's a whole other video. But the fact is that The stress, the DNA does not differentiate what kind of stress it is. It just begins to activate oxidative stress. So the histamine levels are now, histamine is being released because it's being from the mast cells, and so the histamine levels go up. Next thing that happens, cortisol gets produced. Well, it is a stress hormone, right? Okay, so it's produced in order to, as an anti-inflammatory, to help regulate histamine levels. In which case, then aromatase. If you're not familiar with aromatase, that's the one enzyme that is linked to prostate and breast cancer, and now, believe it or not, even autoimmune disorders. So aromatase is produced, but it's produced for good reason, not because the body's trying to pollute itself, but because it needs a quick change to the androgens being produced by the adrenals. Meaning it's taking those androgens like testosterone and other things, and it's converting it into estrogen, because then estrogen begins to activate the autonomic nervous system as well as maintain immune activity. Okay, so we have histamine and we have estrogen. I've talked about this, for the last 4.5 years, I've talked a lot about histamine and estrogen. This is why estrogen goes up. Okay, but at the same time, we also have cortisol levels up, which they're affecting the brain. They are activating, and then cortisol is actually activating and influencing the dopaminergic mesolimbic pathway, thereby changing the neurochemistry and the way it's being utilized in the brain as well as throughout the body. Now, see, all of this is meant to be temporary. But if we aren't catching it because we don't have the capacity, or we're not teaching our children to how to catch these thoughts, because I've seen more and more children anxious, and the funny thing is like it's not even the parents' fault at this point. It's just not. We can't help the environment that we're bringing these children into. We just, we have this world that was designed by man, well, modern day technology, and it's really wreaking havoc on everything in nature. And this is the reason why I feel like we're seeing more children being born with autism, why we're seeing early onset schizophrenia as opposed to just, being diagnosed later, as a late teen, early in a young adult. I feel like this is the reason why we're seeing more children taking psychotropic medications for like anxiety, ADHD, depression. We're just seeing an increase in this, and it's not stopping. And so how do we collectively begin to shift this and stop? I get it. If you have some really intense behaviors and symptoms, regulating it with medication is probably a good thing. Okay. In fact, it is a good thing. So I'm not suggesting that we don't use the medication. What I am suggesting, though, is that whatever we want to do in addition to the medication is to stop trying to control the brain any further. The medications are doing that all by itself. I can tell you straight up that a number of these antipsychotics are tagging like 25 genetic receptors, and that doesn't even include the enzymes. Sometimes I've seen them as many as influencing the activity of 10 different CYP enzymes. So they are strong, and there is no point in trying to duplicate what these medications are supposed to be doing. That's the last thing and the worst thing you could be doing. So the focus really would be, I'm not getting it. Oh my gosh. Okay, so I lost my train of thought. So we don't want to duplicate. The best we can do is focus on the digestive system. And I know I say that a lot, but it's an actual fact, because just taking medications alone is impactful on the digestive system. But if we reach the point of being diagnosed with something like this, our body again is like taxed and stressed to the max. Keep in mind, cortisol is creating changes to this brain structure. Okay, so focusing on the digestive system. And if you're not taking antibiotics, and I don't recommend probiotics. If you take probiotics, or if you eat foods that are processed, or the animals are exposed to, or they're antibiotics, through the way they're raised, they're not antibiotic free, then you want to take probiotics from time to time. I would say, if you can just take a dose once a week, would be good. But if you really want to focus on digestive enzymes as well as hydrochloric acid, period. You really want to focus on those things. I would also recommend a magnesium oil spray, not a pill, not a supplement. The reason for that is because those other magnesiums tend to interact with the medications. They're not recommended for those kinds of meds. However, the kind of magnesium that comes in the oil is doable. That or an Epsom salt bath is doable, and it doesn't interact with your medications. So you can use oils that support the digestive system as well. But again, it depends on the medication on which ones you actually use. So I am not going to make any suggestions there. But that's really what, and maybe taking things like ashwagandha, because keep in mind, and mangosteen. Mangosteen helps to negate aromatase. Ashwagandha helps to regulate cortisol levels. But bear in mind, there's a change to the brain structure. Okay. Can that be rewired and can that be minimized? That one I don't know, and I don't even want to speculate. I would say at this point, if we learned how to pay attention to what, help one another with that pursuit, the pursuit of the reward, and actually help one another through that regard. Again, this isn't taking away from any medications. This is not taking away from your doctor's advice at all. This does not replace any medical advice. This is simply in addition to, because what we want to do is really minimize the amount of cortisol being produced. We want to minimize the amount of estrogen being produced. We want to help the body reappropriate it. We want to help the body to adapt. And more importantly, I'm questioning myself right now as I'm talking to you. And more importantly, I think it's just as important to recognize the fact that stimming, for instance, with autism, isn't about, even though it looks like it's self-soothing, and I believe there are some people that live with autism that have said that's what it does for them, or it could be more of a stimulating thing, like they need that physical activity. That's what makes sense to us. But the fact is it's actually the brain seeking that reward. Okay. And so it's the pursuit of the reward. And the reward is, is the soothing or is the stimulation, but that's the reason for it. It's the reason why it doesn't ever seem like stimming really makes a difference. It's in pursuit of that reward. It becomes almost like an addictive behavior. And so just kind of beginning to divine methods for self-regulation and with awareness that this is not a disease of the brain. This is truly the body at war with the environment. And unfortunately, with the mental health issues that we're seeing, and they're continuing to increase, that's a lot of evidence right there. And I just don't see the need for stigma. I don't see the need to shame. I don't see the need to shun. I think it's time that we actually take responsibility for what we're putting out there, meaning, collectively with regards to how we view these, how we treat these, and why it's even going on, and just time to be honest about why this is really happening. So I'm going to cut it out there because I've said an awful lot. And I appreciate you very, very much. And if there's any questions that you have about this, by all means, let me know. I'm not known for making a short video, but this is very, very important to me. And yeah, so thanks for watching. And I hope you're having a beautiful day wherever you are and that you are safe and well.